Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're just going to be doing a short video on kind of understanding tempo in chess. Now what tempo is tempo is a measurement of moves, like how long does it take to do something. You know, in music, tempo is timing. In chess, we measure time in terms of moves. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, click on your notification icon. So the easiest, simplest explanation is, let's say I want to move this pawn to e4. Well, the most efficient way to do it is to move it 2 squares. So if I were to play e3 and then they continue to e5 and I played e4, I'm now effectively playing the black pieces. So we could say that I've lost a tempo. So naturally in the opening, white starts out a tempo up. White's up a move in the opening. Now there are a lot of ways that you can actually lose tempo in the opening. And this is one of the reasons that for beginners, tempo in chess is a very important concept. Because if we are up a whole bunch of tempos in the opening, basically if we have a bunch of extra moves, and generally speaking in the opening, the way we're measuring tempo is we understand that the opening has a goal. We understand that there are 3 things in the opening that we are both trying to accomplish. We're both trying to control the middle of the board. We're both trying to get our pieces out. Mainly when we talk about pieces, we're talking about knights and bishops, and we're trying to get castled. Now, once we've accomplished all these things, we stop counting tempo. Because at that point, we're in a middle game, and then we're more concerned about other things that are going on. We're looking at weaknesses in the position. We're looking at where our pieces are located in terms of how they're going to attack, how they're going to defend, whether or not we can win material, etc. But in the opening, we're just very concerned with getting our pieces into play and getting our pieces into the middle of the board, which is the most important area of the board. So, for example, if black plays a move like a6, we would call this a wasted tempo, because black is wasting a move, not accomplishing one of the 3 things that we understand we need to accomplish in the opening. So, for example, we could play bishop c4, d6, knight c3, and then let's say black finally decides to catch up with something like bishop g4, creating this pin. White can kind of instantaneously win the game with this really cool combination known as Le Gall's mate. White can play knight takes e5, bishop takes queen, bishop takes check, king e7, and knight d5 is mate. Now the king of tempo, the king of understanding how to get tempo, and the first person that really understood tempo was Paul Morphy. And he was the one that really taught us about tempo and taught us the more complex aspects of tempo. It's very obvious to everybody that if you're 2-stepping pawns and moving a knight back and forth, that you're losing tempo. But there are some other very kind of non-obvious ways that you can lose tempo in the opening. And this was something that Morphy understood. He played this game, Paul Morphy versus the Duke and the Count, that the Duke and the Count played d6. And of course, Morphy kind of viewed this as a tempo loss because this bishop would prefer to go to c5. We can still, of course, develop this bishop to e7, but essentially d6 should be viewed as at least a partial kind of tempo loss. But then this next move is definitely a tempo loss. And it's not a move that we would think of as a tempo loss. This move bishop to g4, we're developing a piece, right? We think as long as we're moving a piece on every single move, we're not losing tempo. But here's the problem. Morphy against the Duke and the Count immediately took here. And this forced the capture of bishop takes f3. Because if black recaptures in this kind of standard way, we're going to exchange and we're going to play knight takes e5, and that wins an entire pawn. So if black doesn't want to lose material, he has to play bishop takes f3. And then after queen takes f3, he takes here, and then white plays here. So how did black lose this tempo? Because black is clearly down a tempo. And actually, if you just want to look at the computer assessment, black is clearly much, much worse here. You know, this is like +2 for white. So how did this happen? Well, the bishop took 2 moves to accomplish the same thing that the queen did in 1. So we got the queen out in 1 move, but the bishop took 2 moves. So using your pieces and expending more energy with your pieces. So like basically the knight moved out 1 square. A piece that moved twice exchanged itself for a piece that moved once. And then that piece that moved once was replaced by a piece. So therefore black lost a tempo. So it's a slightly more complex way to lose a tempo. But it's still losing a tempo. And of course, this was a big problem in this game. Actually, the Duke and the Count lost many, many non-obvious tempos in this game. That was one of the fun things about this game. White threatens mate, the Duke and the Count played knight f6, and then we had queen b3 hitting this f7 square, and we're double attacking. And this caused the Duke and the Count to lose more tempo because they had to kind of try to defend everything. They played queen to e7 to defend against the immediate mate threat, but of course this blocks up the bishop and rook. And then after knight c3, they played another pawn move to defend this pawn on b7. But this queen move and this pawn move are not accomplishing the goal that black wants to accomplish, which is to get his pieces out and to get his pieces into play. So Morphy plays another move, and we can see that Morphy has 4 pieces out to black's 2. So white is up at least 2 tempo, probably more. And then after b5, that's another pawn move, and now Morphy's tempo advantage is so great that he can start sacrificing material to get at the open king and go for a win. And then even gaining more tempo in a very sophisticated way. If you know that you're going to exchange a whole bunch of pieces on a square, you know, the natural thing for a lot of us is, hey, let's double the rooks. Let's play rook d2, rook d1. But what Morphy did was Morphy sacrificed his rook and then brought the other rook over. And that was another gain of a tempo. The opening isn't over yet. The king is not out of the middle. Tempo still matters. And because of this, he was able to win the game in pretty spectacular fashion. And that's one of the reasons that we show this game to beginners, because the black king never got out of the middle of the board, and white won by basically just extracting the maximum number of tempo out of the position. So what are some other, non-obvious tempo situations? Or actually, what are the more obvious tempo situations that happen kind of on the master level, like tempos that get debated all the time? Well, one of my favorite kind of tempo debates, because it happens in every Grandmaster game just about, is whenever this bishop starts holding the pawn on c4. And there's other scenarios as well, like it can actually happen in e-pawn openings as well, so I'll kind of show both scenarios. But like c4, e6, and then let's say knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop g5, castles, and then e3. So this is something that happens a lot, where we have this tension where this pawn can capture this pawn on c4. And the bishop on f1 can capture back. But it's an interesting debate, because the question is, okay, so e3, we probably shouldn't play d captures c4 right away, even though it's possible. But if we do play dc4 right away, black is effectively losing a tempo because this bishop never had to move. So the opening still isn't over. White hasn't finished castling. We would really like to gain this move somehow. So normally here, black, as you can see, will play just about anything else other than dc4. dc4 is not a very popular or very common move. And actually, if we look at the assessments here, the computer gives something like h6 is equality, and that's by far and away the most popular move in this position. But also we could play something like knight on b to d7. Is pretty reasonable. The very old way that they used to play the Tartakower variation was b6 in this position. But dc4, and we're going to see an assessment drop, and we're going to see that white's doing a little bit better after dc4, because guess what? We never had to make that hard decision with should we move our bishop out. So one of the things that happens is, like, let's even just say we play h6, bishop h4, and we follow up with b6, preparing to play bishop b7. We're forcing white to make some sort of decision with this c-pawn. He either needs to play c takes d4, or he needs to waste a tempo with his bishop, with either bishop to e2 or bishop to d3, or he needs to make a move that we might consider a wasted tempo in the position, like a move that's not very useful. He might have to play something like a3, or rook c1, or queen c2. But we're essentially trying to get him to at least play some sort of non-useful move before we personally commit to playing dc4 and giving him this tempo with the bishop. Now there are scenarios, interestingly enough, where we don't do this dance. So I'm just going to show one more scenario to kind of close out the video. So like e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight on b to d5, d6, bishop g5, a6, knight a3, b5, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, knight d5, f5. So we have a very similar scenario right here. We have this bishop defending this pawn, and normally here, the move that tons and tons of grandmasters will play is a lot of people will simply take right away. They'll play e takes f5. Now, it's not 100% obligatory. Like, white can throw in one more good move. But the difference is that it's really well known that black has two really good moves that he can play here without ever having to play a bishop move. He doesn't have to develop his bishop to e6 anytime soon. Basically, black can play bishop g7 and castle, and both of those moves are really useful, but white will actually run out of useful moves at some point. So, like, for example, if white were to play something like c3, black can continue with bishop g7, and there really is nothing better here other than e takes f5. It's still possible to play bishop to d3, but on bishop to d3, black is now less concerned about playing bishop e6 because we've actually blocked communication between our queen and our knight, so now e takes f5 isn't even possible. So it's kind of this weird situation where we're willing to take, and black is willing to take back with bishop takes f5. But what's also interesting about this weird situation is there is actually a mistake that black could make here to lose a tempo. Black could play the move bishop to e6, and you see this assessment go way, 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 way down. And of course, the reason the assessment goes way down is that is a huge tempo loss in an open position. White can now play e takes f5, and now if black continues with the normal move bishop takes f5, queen f3 is kind of a devastating blow because black never had the opportunity to get that bishop to the g7 square, and he would have to retreat with bishop e6, and then knight f6 is a really harsh move. And it's not possible to play something like queen d7 because knight f6 check would win the queen, or even something like queen c8 because knight b6 is going to pick up the exchange. And that's the consequence of being down tempo in certain situations. Or, of course, very adorable would be knight e7, knight f6's mate. So that's also a possibility. But this is how we count tempo. These are the ways that we can lose tempo. These are the ways that we can gain tempo. And these are the situations, these are some situations where maybe you don't care about a tempo loss. If bishop g7, white's perfectly okay with losing the tempo, but black should actually be the one that's cautious about not deploying his bishop to either d7 or e6 too early because black doesn't want to lose that tempo. So that's a basic overview of how tempo works in chess. I hope that you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.